part of the show itself. So let's see. Are we on? Are we on? I have to like.
I'm not sure. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Screen perfect. Okay, cool. We're now joined right now by Alejandro Prado, and he's a PhD candidate at UC Santa Barbara, and he was actually scheduled to be speaking at a number of places all across the world this semester and in the summer. Can you talk a little bit about where you were headed?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it was supposed to be a big year for me and to really kind of talk about my research to different audiences. So yeah, I was excited to be going to Knox this year. I was gonna try to really um, talk about. I'm working on this article, and I was gonna engage with one part of it, which is trying to find the materiality, like kind of like just Gloria Salduo and try to contextualize her within global capitalism. Just because there's kind of a this like cause obviously I'm in Chicano studies. So if you move into like the international, a lot of times you lose the specifics or the particularities of what makes Chicanx relevant, particular. So that's kind of something I was trying to engage with and trying to see how we can use on Salud as a theoretical framework. Um, so yeah, so
So
that's on hold a little bit.
you were headed to Poland and to China. Last year last year you were able to speak in Cuba, Casa de las Americas.
Right.
But so what were the organizations in Poland and China that were bringing you out?
Well, in Poland, I was supposed to be there in May. It's like the European Association of American Studies. So it was gonna be my first time going to Europe. Um, but yeah, Poland has, I guess, interesting history. This professor from Santa Barbara, he had like a residency there, so he kind of facilitated for some students to go. And that was supposed to be early May. So
In
and
China?
then in China, it was more of a summer program through just to study Chinese philosophy in Beijing. Um, but I was actually studying Mandarin like at PCC earlier this year because I was trying to be somewhat prepared to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, then COVID-19 hit, the classes went online. I got a message from China saying like we're gonna cancel this, we'll postpone it for next year.
Yeah.
So yeah, so hopefully I guess 2021 is a year that I'm looking forward to now.
So what was the you mentioned earlier Knox? Can you tell our audience, those might be not familiar, what is Knox?
Sure, Knox, NACCS, National Association of Chicano Studies. So it's the national conference for the discipline of Chicano Studies. Yeah, so it happens once a year. It's been going on for I don't know how long, a few decades. I can't tell you the exact date. Um, but yeah, so it's a conference where folks come. It's academics, activists, artists. They come together to different places around the country and just kind of come together, see what we're doing in each part, talk about our work, and make connections and trying to, I guess, solidify or see the complexity of Chicanidad at a really a national level.
Yeah. And this year it was out in Seattle, and they held out for a pretty long time before canceling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I know. I was kind of a little bit worried, but I think it ended up being about the whole contract and just the economics behind getting stuck in a contract and losing hundreds of thousands of dollars if you bailed out too early.
Yeah. Jeez. All right. So what was the title of the title of your presentation that got accepted to Knox this year?
What was it? It was I can't remember exactly, but it was something about understanding new tribalism within the context of global capitalism. So yeah, I just kind of went back to, or I went to read Saldua's book, like the last one that was published, The Light in the Dark. And there she was developing the idea of new tribalism. And I was reading it, and as I was reading it, I've also been reading a lot of political economy and like Marxist texts, and I was seeing overlaps, though not as I guess literal, but I felt like there was definitely connections. And I was just trying to explore that a little bit and see if those connections were all in my head or if they're actually there. Um, so yeah, I still haven't got around to it, but that's something I'm trying to do.
So the subject matter of what you write, this idea of Chicana data within a larger global context. In many ways, it comes kind of from the stuff of your own life, right? I mean, you're a lot of what you're writing about is actually, it's, I remember when I first heard about your work, it sounded to me like something that would come from the mind of someone from the SGV. This is really very San Gabriel Valley kind of.
Well, I wanted to actually, I wrote like this like 200 word paragraph that kind of represents why I'm interested in this project. And yeah, kind of,
Sure.
so I'll read it real quick.
No, sure.
Okay. I lift the lid of my abuelita's pot, where I expect to find cocido or capirutada. Instead, I see slices of oranges mixed with entire chicken legs and thighs, dipped in a bright orange sauce. This starkly contrasts the dark bottom of the deep pot. Her innovative attempt to appease her grandson's seemingly erratic developing taste buds. In 1998, I moved a few miles eastward from El Sereno to Alhambra, cities on the east of Los Angeles County, found in and near the San Gabriel Valley, or the SGV. This subtle geographic shift manifested itself most profoundly in the food I soon craved, perhaps expected, given the contemporary SGV is a location where peoples of Chinese and Mexican descent coexist, albeit within a Chinese ethnoburb, a community largely driven culturally and economically by the Chinese population. My abuelita's Mexicanized orange chicken becomes a culinary contradiction that reflects the global political and economic processes that characterize the SGV's contemporary cultural manifestation and the broader Los Angeles material shifts. So then my palate becomes a tool that illuminates the importance of both unpacking and embracing contradictions, a perspective which manifests in my dissertation project, which investigates specifically how a Los Angeles-based Chicanidad or Latinidad is directly and directly connected to the rise of China. So yeah, that's kind of how I come into the project.
Yeah, we should open with that, and I'm getting kind of emotional now because I'm originally from El Sereno. I lived there first, decade of my life. More than that, teenage years. But as a kid, we used to, the El Sereno Library, it was okay, but the Alhambra Library was a lot better. So I used to go to the Alhambra Library all the time, and I would spin the wheel. And anyway, so I have all these memories of going into Alhambra as like this place where I could learn things, and it's just I don't know. I didn't know that I thought you were from Alhambra. I didn't know that. I didn't know that you had that that little journey.
yeah, I traveled eastward. Well, I moved in '98, and I was 5 years old.
Yeah.
So I don't have too many memories. But I think I was definitely able to see the difference to like my parent, because remember my dad grew up in Monterey Park, in like the 70s, 80s. So that's when it was it was like more, I guess, Mexican in that time. So I kind of later on I write about how my grandma initially she would be making Mexican food for her son, but then for me she was trying to make more like this Chinese Mexican concoction.
Yeah, no, that's really beautiful. Can you speak to like what that means to you and to your family and to if you want to get into like your father and who he is and or your parents and I don't know, you can talk whatever you want to talk about, but like
I don't know, I guess I just like the whole growing up like in this like Chinese culture in a sense. I really enjoyed it, but I think it had to do a lot largely due to the fact that like my dad's a professor, and my mom's also like has a graduate degree, so I think that enabled me to be like in like the AP classes as a high school kid, they're also very racialized. So it exposed me more to like Chinese culture, Chinese friends. So yeah, I think it was also a very particular experience and that enabled me to venture into this culture somehow. So yeah, so it's something that's always been, and I didn't know how, I guess, unique it was until I left the San Gabriel Valley and I went to Riverside for college and then Santa Barbara for grad school. And I was like, oh damn, like it's not as common for these like Chinese and Mexican people to really come together and like share space as much.
No, I mean it's a very particularly it's very SGV. It's very Alhambra, Rosemead, Monterey Park, even into La Puente. I mean, it's like at the mall, anyways. I mean, people come and go,
Yeah.
so it's a very what is normal everyday SGV life is very not normal, especially when you consider like what's broadcast on television and what was thought of as the national culture, like the idea of just uh, Mexican people and Chinese people next to each other at a in a food court is not considered like America, you know?
Yeah, and that's kind of something I've been wanting to explore just because I remember growing up, like you go to these places that are, authentic in a sense, 'cause that's kind of how the SGV is understood as like authentic food. But a lot of times you see people who are making the food being like Latino immigrant men and women, mostly men though, that you kind of see as like the door swings open and shut. So there's also this like hidden labor component that I really think also keeps like this whole image of the San Gabriel Valley um, going as well. So there's just so many layers to this interconnection that's really spatial and regional for this area.
Yeah, yeah. So what are like some of the big takeaways for our audience that they should really know about your work and some of the things that for
Yeah.
what you're working on right now.
So yeah, I'm in the research process right now. So it's I guess the reality of the world has kind of been shifting my project in some different directions. Um, but yeah, so the title of my dissertation is called Spatial Mestizaje, Chicanidad within the Rise of China, Global Capitalism, and International Solidarity in 21st Century Los Angeles, California. So yeah, at one point I'm looking at what the San Gabriel Valley is and how it's inherently connected to transnational capital coming in from China. Um, so it's a delicate line to walk, I think, in the argument that I'm making, because at one point it's a critique of global capitalism. It's a study of power, um, but the way that I'm looking at is looking at transnational capital from China coming in. But there's on the other side, there's also this like xenophobic response to like the rise of China, which is obviously anchored in like this Cold War rhetoric. Um, so I'm trying to walk that line where I'm studying the power dimensions in political economy. So I'm looking at the San Gabriel Valley and what makes it unique and why so much transnational capital is coming into this area. So I kind of look historically at how how Monterey Park specifically was marketed as a Chinese Beverly Hills in 1977, kind of right after the death of Mao. So that's one aspect. And then, so I'm looking at the image of the San Gabriel Valley. And then from the image, kind of what I was saying earlier, I look at the labor component and like this Latino immigrant labor that is really a large driving force of the restaurant industry. So it's kind of another dimension that I'm exploring. And then from there, I look at more details, just kind of like how COVID-19 is affecting these workers, specifically like the precarious nature of the restaurant industry. And then I move over to a little bit more to Los Angeles broadly. And this is what I'm working on right now, is looking at like commercial real estate in downtown LA. Just like, so you see all these giant buildings just like boosting up, being built, like changing the skyline pretty much of downtown LA. Mm-hmm. And for a large part, it's there's a few billion-dollar projects that have been coming from China. So there's two right there by Staples Center. There's one that's half built still, and it hasn't been worked on for about a year. So yeah, so there's like rumors that it lost funding, so there's not real clarity. Mm-hmm. But I'm also exploring how, like, because that's under the jurisdiction of Jose Huizar, right? So I think folks know like the critiques of him. So I'm also looking at, yeah, exactly. So I'm looking at how, also like as a Chicano politician, because he's like indicted of taking bribes and doing illegal things.
Yeah.
I'm also looking at how Chicanos could also be in the mix, specifically when they're in this system, they're like institutional positions. So how that's adding a new layer of complications that Chicano studies as a discipline also needs to embrace, right? And see like, how do we understand that? And then the last chapter, which I think is most exciting, well, they're all exciting, but when I haven't started doing this, so I'm excited to do it,
Yeah.
is looking at international solidarity between Chicanos and activists in China. So specifically around the issue of environmentalism. So yeah, so I'm looking at there's this nonprofit in LA that they work around the ports, right? So there's this inherent connection logistically through global trade, production that's connecting these communities. So there's actually been folks from LA that go to China, and yeah, talk and collaborate and try to figure out how people in China who are facing similar relations, similar realities, could also resist or could also, voice their opinions, though it's in a different context. So kind of trying to adapt that and have these conversations, I think, is really important.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really fantastic. I mean, it's really interesting listening to you talk about your personal experience as well as connecting to all these works. But you come from a little bit of a different personal background that your parents are both they both come out of one's a professor, the other one works in the college system as well. It's a little different than most people, but I'm curious to find out if you face some, regardless of that, you face some of the other things I know, because most people I know who are of Mexican descent, who tend to pursue intellectual pursuits, always runs this barrier where they have their intelligence questioned. Like, you're really not supposed to be here. You're really, like, especially if it's like science, mathematics, and that's just horrible. But even with the humanities, like, I know I personally have experienced it, and virtually everyone I know who is of Mexican descent who ended up going to an Ivy League or does go just present somewhere that does what you do. They always run in this barrier where there's like this questions, but when dealing not so much with themselves, but dealing with other communities, whether they be white or Asian, oftentimes, I mean, sadly, it's kind of like, like, how do you know this? How do you? I mean, I might experience that as early as in my early years, just going to the Alhambra Library, But have you also kind of experienced that, or have you found this in your work?
Yeah, I think it was like more present earlier on because like maybe like as like a younger kid, like in high school coming in, just kind of, but more so being like tokenized, I think, which is, I don't know, which is terrible. But I think in college and in the grad school, I think being in spaces of like, because I'm in Chicano studies, so there's like some sort of, I don't know, I think embracing, but there's also obviously questioning, more so about my work specifically.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's like, is this Chicano studies, right? Because I'm looking at China, I'm looking at these international components. So you have folks kind of questioning just kind of the integrity of the work and if it falls within the parameters of what makes Chicano studies. But like, I think like in terms of my intelligence, I guess I've been fortunate enough to have professors inside and outside Chicano studies embrace me, and I don't know, I feel like I'm, yeah, embrace my project and be supportive. And I've just always tried to be as transparent with all the stuff I don't know and that I want to know. Yeah, and it's been working out somewhat so far.
Yeah, so far. Okay. Well, I think within that little not that little, but within the framework of Chicano studies, yeah. But it's when you get into the broader world and start presenting for like all kinds of audiences that it can get really rough, or it has been for me, anyways. I know.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was getting ready for this in Poland, because it was going to be at like American Studies Association or European American Studies Association. So it's going to be definitely a different audience than what I'm used to, right? Because I've presented mostly at Knox and then in Cuba, and then in smaller conferences. But this is going to be the first one that I was going to be like somewhat of an outsider, or pretty much an outsider in that space.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess I gotta. But look, the conference is just postponed, so maybe next year I'll be there.
Experience the.
Yeah, I'll have a better story to tell.
Yeah, no, your work sounds fantastic. It seems like you're right. You walk a very fine line when you tackle this topic. But I think for many of us living in this area of the world, it's really one of the very defining relationships that there is. I mean, the question of these communities and how they interact. It's it's a very untold quote unquote American story, but it's also it's it's one that defines the lives of millions of people. I'm really interested though in hearing about your experiences in Cuba and presenting at Casa Las Americas. What was that like for you? And
So it was October, right? We were in Cuba in October at presenting at Casa Las Americas at the conference called Latinos Study of Latinos in the US. Um, which was really interesting because just like the whole idea of the title, because it was
yeah,
like Latinos in the US. So like looking at Latinos in the US as the object of study.
mhm.
Um, and maybe I'm used to seeing that when it's like folks within the US looking at Latinos. And it's always like,
Mhm.
oh, that's weird, it's good, or that's another whole other debate. But being at Casa Las Americas and seeing folks from Mexico talk about like Chicanos in the US, it was weird. Like I never, I don't know, I hadn't really experienced that before.
Yeah,
But for me, it was kind of like I don't know, if identity crisis or something, because it's like it was a space where folks from all Latin America were coming together to share work on Latinos, right? But a lot of it was a lot of discussion about Latinidad and how folks have access to that. And most of the times, like I think I access an idea of Latinidad through Mexico or through a Mexican identity, but I'm also third generation, right? So my grandparents were the ones from Mexico. My parents were born here, and then I was born here as well. So as I was in Cuba, and they were talking about Latinidad, I started identifying like Chicanidad as my base to understand Latinidad, which I think has been different because throughout my life prior to that, I was always seeing like Mexico as the way to Latinidad.
yeah,
Um, so I was just, I think, something that really impacted me from being in Cuba and being around so many people of Latin American descent. And I started seeing just my whole experience in LA and Southern California
mhm.
as unique and as almost as part of like some sort of, I don't know, Latinidad experience.
Yeah, yeah. And the United States, very much Mexican, but when you leave the United States, you realize you're not this thing called Mexican. Like you're something
Yeah.
distinct. You are, but you're definitely,
Yeah, I
you're
actually like
have a different experience.
2 years ago, I wanted to go study in Mexico City at UNAM.
Mhm.
And then they'd ask me like, "Are you Mexican?" And I'd have to say no because they're asking me like my passport, where I was from, and
Yeah,
between my pocho Spanish, they're like, "Oh, you ain't from here."
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's just it's one of those painful moments, and you guys kind of. I don't know if there's anything more intelligent to say about it than that. Just other than like, oh.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
but I'm trying to develop my Spanish a little better because I think it's definitely like an avenue to access and communicate with folks on the outside of the US that have a different understanding or a similar understanding, but that you can't really access without the language. So
yeah,
it's been hard work, but I've been trying to develop Spanish verbally and like being able to read and write.
yeah. Well, I mean, it seems like this is like part of your general approach to taking Chicano studies outside of the realm of just outside of not just the realm's wrong word, outside of just conversations between other people in Chicano studies, other people in the Chicano community, and out into like the world community, like part of as a group of people amongst the population of the world, right? That seems to be
Hmm.
a common theme with your work. Um, so I'm curious, like, I mean, I'm sure there's support for that, but I'm also sure there's some pushback for that because I'm with you. I think that we need to describe ourselves as part of the world community, and I think that our history and the history of the things we've experienced in this country are pertinent to understanding the country as a whole. And so, a lot of the 101 kind of knowledge we have, we need to get that out to the world, and we also need to see like how our history interplays with other people's histories, to see like how these things connect. I mean, how they connect, and why this is not important just to ourselves, but important to other people. So I'm curious, have you got what kind of pushback have you got from the work that you're doing now?
So on the first point, I think that's kind of one of the things that I'm really trying to make, where I say like Chicano experience is particular, but there's also these general things that we could extract from it to understand other social relations around the world. Um, so that's why I'm really excited for that chapter about Chicanos in LA and folks in China. But push in terms of pushback for the work, I think it's just been more so saying that I exist outside of these imagined parameters, right? Or this, as specifically as I begin to, like, I've been reading a lot about China, and I've cited a lot of folks, Asian American studies and folks and scholars from China, just kind of understand how things are changing at a global scale. So yeah, so it's just been more so seeing me as like maybe going too far into a different discipline or not anchoring myself enough in Chicano studies. But what I'm trying to do, I think, is make Chicano studies, Chicanic studies in conversation with these other fields and show what these particular experiences and realities can contribute to like a larger understanding of power, a larger understanding of like global capitalism, which is what I'm ultimately studying.
Yeah. No, I think that's actually absolutely necessary. I mean, it's absolutely it mirrors reality, so that's so it's very important. Yeah, sometimes these people, I don't know, I don't want to get you in troubles, but sometimes I feel like these people are talking like Chicanos on the moon or something like that. Like we don't have any interaction with anyone else. We just need to focus on like, this and this and this and this. I mean, we're part of a larger world. We're thrown into our entire identity is the fact that we're thrown into a larger world context of, mostly terrible things happening. But
Yeah. And I'm actually I'm writing an article right now about just the historical connection that Chicano studies has had with China.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm citing like all the literature and the discipline. Yeah, so this is an article that's hopefully coming out soon. It's kind of just looking at the whole history of the discipline in China. So saying that there has been connections, right? Historically, there has been connections with China and other parts of the world. And now I'm looking at also just how it's impossible not to look at these connections when like we're so integrated economically and production is kind of situated through all these different countries, which is connecting workers, right? So almost like the idea of like a global proletarian.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I'm interested. That kind of transitions next to the next question. I want to hear about some of these international connections that you had mentioned between workers in China and workers in the San Gabriel Valley.
Well, I'm looking at direct and indirect.
Well, I'm in Los Angeles, not San Gabriel.
Los Angeles, yeah. So the connection I'm looking at specifically, which I'm trying to explore a little further, is looking at the ports. So like Long Beach, and the LA ports, which I think that's about 40% of U.S. consumption comes through these ports, right?
Yeah.
But these ports are also leading to a lot of environmental degradation for like the brown communities, like largely the brown community that live around these ports. Right, so environmental racism. But there's a logistical connection there. That so one side it's obviously going to the Inland Empire, but the other part it's also going back to China through like shipments. So then seeing how these folks here in LA who are experiencing these, basically like all these fumes and toxins coming into their bodies, into their homes, into their soils, into their foods, like see that there's also connections to China where people over there where there's so much production going on are also are experiencing similar symptoms or other types of symptoms as a result of a commodity chain that is connecting these people, right? So we're connected through like a reality is kind of connecting us and forcing us to see the connection with other people in other parts of the world. So that's something that I'm exploring.
Wow. That's of course. So yeah, most people don't know this, but the Inland Empire is actually one of the most industrialized areas in the country. Isn't that one of the biggest manufacturing centers in the U.S.?
Yeah, it's like I think it's like the country's warehouse or something. That's where all the warehouses are in the Inland Empire. Yeah, so that's where all the headquarters are for like a bunch of the headquarters are for like Amazon and UPS and things like that. Actually, like Ontario Airport, it recently started having direct flights from Ontario to China, like passenger flights. Before it's always been like commercial, commercial and like freight, I think is the word. But now that you're seeing this connection with the Ontario and the Inland Empire also taking up a greater role. So the Inland Empire is definitely booming right now.
Yeah.
Well, not for everybody.
Well, not for everybody. of course, is the subject of your work.
Yeah.
So, the not for everybody aspect of your work. I mean, we see that. I mean, this entire area of the country was in many ways built on the backs of Mexican labor, and for historically, if you're talking about like Simon's brick factory or something like that back in the late 1800s, stuff like that. So we see that kind of connection to this day. I mean, to this day, that we see still that it's the exploitation, the hyper exploitation of this kind of like brown wage workforce. Um, do you see any like chance that trend changing, or is it going to require the entire restructure of the economy, or what is your prognosis on that?
Well, I think there's obviously been the other level or other reality of immigration, and just kind of how that's another layer to, I guess, brownness that's being exploited, right? So you have this largely undocumented labor class that is very easy to control in a sense, because they could be deported at any time. Though obviously communities are fighting very very strongly for that not to happen, but also a very hyper exploitable class. So do I think that it will transition from like a Latino based to another racially based identity or group of people? I don't see that happening soon, but it could happen, right? But I don't think that's the goal, right? The goal is not to be like, oh, let's exploit them instead.
Let's get these people coming here. Yeah. No, I don't see it happening either. But I mean, I guess the question was more like, do you think the Latinos are ever going to rise up? The raza is going to like rise up out here, independent of everything, independent of the whole society. I mean, like, I personally, I don't, because there's always this incrementalism. There's always like, if we do this, if we do that, if we do that, we will catch up with other groups of people. But
Right.
historically, we, alongside African Americans, alongside other a few other groups of people, have been kind of the backbone of so much of the kind of the labor that almost labor's beneath labor, that makes all this other stuff possible. And I just don't see I see individuals being able to escape this,
Right.
whether they would in whether they're doing good things, like your parents or something like that, or whether they're doing horrible things like Sleazy Wheezy. Individuals on an individual level can escape, but as a group, unless the whole society changes, there's no hope for our collective community. I don't think, anyway. I don't know what your opinion on that is.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming from. There has to definitely be like a really like a revolutionary change, because there's just this dependence system, like the systematic dependence on exploitable labor. It's going to be us, or it's going to be someone else that's always going to be exploited, right? If we have this same social relation of exploitation of capitalism. So I think there's folks doing work at like community levels that they're trying to empower that local base, and I think that's definitely really important. But yeah, I think there has to be coalition building, and I think just right now with this COVID-19 crisis, I think it is a precarious time, or a particular time where there is an understanding that like, damn, we're getting screwed over, and like, right, so like specifically like folks that work in the restaurant industries and the service industries, it's like, oh damn, this is like this job that's so delicate, right? So it employs like 500,000 people in LA.
Yeah,
I think just like this crisis is really allowing an opportunity to hopefully build coalition, right? Even like I'm thinking just like the whole reclaiming our homes that's happening in Sereno. Just kind of re-envisioning how like property ownership or land ownership, and even seeing like the fucked up reasons of what rent does, right? Rent and debt is just like seriously always fucking up like working class communities, right? So yeah, I think there definitely has to be a systematic change, and I think right now COVID-19 has been a time where folks are kind of exposed to this reality that there needs to be some sort of change.
yeah. So we have a question here, or a kind of a statement. Maybe you can address it. It's coming from Vicky Carrillo. She says, my kids took a Chicano Studies course for the first time at PCC. It was a bad experience, so they don't know where to go from here. identity is definitely an issue growing up in Glendale, where it's 80% white and Armenian. So, what advice would you have for people who are growing up, people of Mexican descent, growing up in parts of the city that, where they might be disconnected from, who they are, and yet still they still get the hammer of you're a Mexican, right? But they don't get the the shield and the pride,
Yeah, I think, well, for me, I guess I'll speak from my experience. I think it was definitely cultivating spaces. For me, it was in college, at Riverside, like being part of Mecha, and not just being like going to spaces where the folks are coming together culturally, but also politically. But I guess in terms of, I think I'm looking at her question, it seems more so, I guess, being discriminated in Glendale. And I think, yeah, that's kind of the importance then of cultivating a community space, right? And acting in collective, and not seeing it as having to change one person's mind. So like treat you better, right? Because it becomes like the systematic thing. So there's really, that's where the power comes in, being in coalition, in community. And for me, it was, at Riverside and being part of Metro and being part of these spaces where I was able to get further politicized, and grow a sense of, I guess, pride in my culture, in my roots, and who I am as a person. So yeah, it was a process, and I'm still in that process. Still trying to figure it out, understand who I am, how I fit, and what I guess represent.
Yeah, hell yeah. All right, so what is it that people should be looking out for coming out from you in the near future? What projects do you want to promote? What's a good word?
Well, I guess coming out in the future, what I've been working on is an article, like I mentioned earlier. Let me see. Do I have the title? Let me see. I have the title right here. All right, the title is, I'm trying to submit it to Aslan. It's called "The Great Wall of China: Pathway to Aslan: A Metacritical Reading of China and Chicanic Studies and the Need for Internationalism." So that's like the first title comes out of Rodolfo Naya's book, A Chicano in China. So he was very poetic in his writing about China and Chicanos and these connections that exist between them. Mm-hmm. So that's hopefully coming out soon. I'm trying to finish up the final edits to submit it. And so if y'all want to learn about the historic connections between China and Chicano studies, that it's not just me making something up based on Gabriel Valley, but there is some sort of precedent. That's kind of what's coming up soon.
All right. And is there anywhere people will be able to find this? I was just personal interaction.
Well, it's going to be, hopefully, I'm submitting to Aslan, so hopefully it gets accepted there. And wherever it ends up being, I'm always more than happy to share my work. People, if anybody wants to read what I write, that's always a plus, right?
Right. All right. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I'm sorry that this happened, and I'm sorry it killed so much of your momentum that you had going. Really, or it slowed. This happened at a time in your life where things were really happening, but from the sounds of it, it sounds like you're on towards a lifetime of things happening. So, a pandemic can happen sooner or later. So, better now than later, right?
Yeah. It's a crappy time, right? But I guess it's always a bit crappy time. It's a pandemic.
Right. So, congratulations in the work you've done so far, and I'm looking forward to hearing from all that you have coming. So, thank you for joining me, and best of luck.
Yeah, thanks for having me and letting me speak.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
All right. See you.